All right, very good. Welcome, everyone, to our Foundations of Global Health series. We welcome you today on this windy day. Alexa, can you go to the next slide for me? I will just briefly introduce the Foundations of Global Health series, go over the objectives and some upcoming events before I will introduce our speaker for today. Our Foundations of Global Health is a varied and exciting field to which many healthcare providers, researchers, and faculty aspire to being professionally engaged. With our being globally connected world and with COVID-19 uniting the world to solve an issue, global health has never been more relevant. This year-long programming is designed to feature our experts in the field of global health, KUMC's faculty, researchers, and clinicians, our international partners, and our community partners. Each presenter will share his or her personal story or personal journey, educational background, mentors, books, and articles that gave inspiration, challenges, lessons learned, successes, and epiphanies, as well as life-changing moments and perhaps some associate heartbreaks. All right, with this Foundations of Global Health series, we hope that the learner will gain foundational information on pathways into global health and will be challenged to deepen knowledge on equality and mutualism, which garners true collaboration and global health exchange for everyone's equal benefit. We also hope that the learner will examine existing attitudes around global health so that we at the University of Kansas Medical Center are trendsetters who move beyond the us versus them and have versus have not mentality. And lastly, we hope that the learner will be able to appraise global health, including global health research, philosophy, approaches, attitudes, and the varied efforts in the area of health disparities, health inequalities, and community health. All right, we have several upcoming events. Today, we welcome Dr. Gabrielle Malfatti, who will speak to us on cross-cultural relations. Where are the fellow global citizens? We also have Dr. Mani, who will present on April 1st at 12 p.m. With a presentation titled Lessons Learned from Them. Additionally, we have Dr. Kovac joining us on April 15th at 12 p.m., and he will give a presentation on international exchange between Peru, Ghana, and the US. We also welcome Dr. Julian Franco on Tuesday, May 4th at 12. And lastly, we have Dr. Nicholas Comninelis, who will join us on Wednesday, May 12th at 12 p.m. with a presentation titled Post-COVID Global Health. All right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Gabrielle Malfatti. She's the Director of Global Engagement and Associate Teaching Professor of Educational Leadership at the University of Missouri College of Education. Dr. Malfatti leads efforts to infuse global mindness into the ethos of the college and all aspects of educator preparation through education abroad, international student and scholar support, internationalization of curriculum, and fostering international partnerships. Her research and practice are grounded on reciprocity and mutualism, international education leadership, globally minded educator preparation, and intercultural communication and adaptation. Dr. Malfatti has been recognized for her work with the Dean Cockrell Statewide Dissertation of the Year Award, the NASFA Region for 2014 Most Innovative International Initiative Award for the Mizzou EdTeach Abroad program, and the 2019 Association of North America Higher Education International, or in short, ANAHI's, Patrick Moreo Global Education Leadership Award. Her edited volume, People-Centered Approaches Toward the Internationalization of Higher Education was released in September 2020 by IGI Global. Welcome, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. It is so good to be back among friends. As you were reading the lineup for the upcoming events, it was so nice to see not only colleagues with whom I have developed wonderful relationships, but who have co-authored with me, and also the presentation on Colombia, which is where I'm from. So everything seemed to tie together very nicely. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. As I was saying prior to the introduction, I would love for this to be interactive, and I know that that can be tough on the Zoom, but we are humans who can interject and kind of pop in and make comments. So the topic that we are covering today is one that I know touches us in regards to how we view citizenship. And for those who see citizenship as by virtue of where we were born and the nationality that we espouse, and for those of us who see the planet as the place where we move about, it's going to lead to an interesting conversation. So I invite you into that conversation, not just the presentation. We can move forward. So one of the things that we are going to do today is problematize the idea of global citizenship. What do we mean when we, and especially as members of the academy, set goals for global citizenship? Many of the programs that we create at US institutions and around the world really see as one of their goals the creation of global citizens, or the awakening of the students' understanding as global citizens. So who gets a world passport? If we start looking at this idea of global citizenship through a lens of equity and inclusivity, who is it that is included in that world passport? And then who does not? So when we move forward, please. Paulo Freire said, language is never neutral. And that is why I feel the liberty, at the liberty to problematize a term that has become ubiquitous and kind of omnipresent in international education. And in the case of the KU Medical Center, as we move around the world, not just as educators, but also as healers, I think that it's important to take into account the way that we speak about ourselves and the people that we have, with whom we are engaging abroad. So let's move on. So what is global citizenship? According to the United Nations, because that's where this word, this statement has been coined, and the United Nations promotes education toward global citizenship at the same time that one of the Sustainable Development Goals is equity. And I think that that's where the rub comes for me, in the way that citizenship is not an inclusive term in most people's experience. So when we talk about global citizenship, the United Nations sees it as a type of citizenship that transcends what is purely national, is unrelated to a specific identity and or territory, and embraces a constantly evolving global ethic. This is the most basic understanding, and we're going to have two other slides where we go a little deeper into it. But can we go back? Thank you. But before we get there, this idea of transcending what is purely national, definitely in our own country over the last 5 years, we have seen a rise in nationalistic pursuits, ideologies, and ethos, and a confrontation among those who see us as part of the world, and others who would prefer that we remain isolated from that world, at the same time that we benefit greatly from the globalization that in many instances has been spearheaded or created in our military presence, our economic presence, and definitely our cultural presence around the world. So I think that as people who identify as US citizens, taking on that idea of citizenship of the world is one that we really have to reflect upon. And I often say I am a US citizen by choice. I wasn't born here. And I tell my children that they are US citizens by a geographic accident. I am the third generation in my family to have children in a country other than where we were born. So I had an Austrian grandmother who had an Italian, my father, who had children in Colombia, who then I came to the US and had children here in the US. So the idea of that global mobility with an open ticket in a way is something that is very close, and the generational migration is something that is really close to me personally. So that kind of brings us to the idea of identity, and what is it that makes me an American, and what is it that makes me a person who, having grown in the global South, can now represent a global North institution, usually in the global South, in ways that promote the goals that you have for this program: mutualism, equity, reciprocity in our learning, and respect. So those become part of that global ethic of behavior when we who have the opportunity for global mobility encounter people from other cultures for whom citizenship may not mean the same thing that it means for us. We can move. So if we keep drilling down, global citizenship, as defined by the United Nations, exists at various levels in numerous contexts and at different times, with no single identifiable institutional framework. In the New World Order, it seeks to expand its scope and democratize a decision-making process that can radically affect basic aspects of our societies, especially in people's lives, particularly those of minorities and the disadvantaged. And these are the aspirational goals of the idea of global citizenship that the United Nations promotes. But they find themselves at odds with the world that we live in the world that we move in. It is still a world of boundaries, a world of visas, a world of travel bans, and a world where global mobility is not guaranteed for every inhabitant of the planet. So I love the idea of love knows no boundaries, because I know that the work that you all do in your international global engagement and the work that I do with my pre-service teachers is most often rooted in love, rooted in the idea that we can use our God-given talents and gifts to support the human experience of other people that we may not otherwise have encountered if we just stayed in one place. So whether I am with a group of pre-service teachers in India or in Cuba or in Colombia or in Rwanda, it is that love for education, the love for children, the love for teaching, the love for a future that is yet to come, that mobilizes us and takes us out of our comfort zone, to try new things and to engage with other people. So when we look at that decision-making process that can radically affect basic aspects of our societies, the work that we do, with Mizzou Teach Abroad, or that the various programs, international programs that KU Medical Center runs around the world, has that potential. And we make those decisions with intentionality of being better, being our better selves in those environments. We can move forward, please. Okay. There is actually a logo for global citizenship. I didn't know it, but there is a flag, and this is the icon for it. And so it's all encompassing. We see a human replacing the maps, and transcending time zones and parallels and longitudinal markers. So global citizens act without limits or geographical distinctions, and they do so outside the traditional spheres of power. Their goal is to defend human dignity and to promote social accountability and international solidarity, in which tolerance, inclusion, and recognition of diversity occupy pride of place in word and deed, reflecting the multiplicity of actors involved in the actions of global citizenship. So there's a lot here, in the sense that if you are going to bear the label of being a global citizen, according to the United Nations aspirational goals, this is what we should be embodying. The idea of acting without limits or geographical distinctions. And as an immigrant in the United States, with the immigration conversation always alive, this idea of acting without limits seems so far removed from the way that we do it. Because even within our own geographical boundaries, we act within limits. We othered many people, who may have been here for generations, longer than those of the families that we come from. And yet in this kind of piece of the globe that we inhabit, we continue to other them. And so it seems problematic for me to keep thinking that we can promote the idea of global citizenship, especially among our students and among our traditional student populations in the US, at a time when we haven't even come to terms with the idea of that global humanness, that is part of the dignity of every person that we encounter. So that does require for you to move outside the traditional spheres of power, because it has been those spheres of power that maintain the status quo. And we in education are currently reckoning our role in maintaining systems of oppression, systems of exclusion, locally. And I think it's time that we do so globally as well. So it seems ironic to me that human dignity is something that needs to be defended at the very basic aspect of being a human being. That part of it should be our most basic right and tenant and way of engaging with the rest of the world. But that has not been the case. And we have allowed, and sometimes consciously or unconsciously, perpetuated systems that rob others of that dignity. So if we are to engage in these actions of global citizenship, by whatever name, and I will, at the end of this, talk with you all and engage in the conversation of what are other ways of moving away from that language of exclusion, and how to make it more inclusive. So we can move on. So who don't get to be global citizens? We have refugees, we have asylum seekers, we have migrants that are people without a country in many instances. So if citizenship is based on the land that we inhabit, the government that is supposed to protect us, when we have over 74 million displaced people in the world, some of them internally displaced in places like Colombia, in India, and Bangladesh, and Myanmar. The idea of global citizenship becomes even more problematic because we very easily grant global citizenship to a US student who spends 3 weeks in Peru or a semester in Ghana. But at the same time, we deny entrance to a state university to a DACA student who moved into the US when they were 3 years old, and not necessarily because of their own volition. So when we look at refugees who are people that are protected, there are laws that once somebody is identified as a refugee, they are supposed to be granted a certain number of protections, but that doesn't always happen. And definitely the conditions under which countries maintain refugee populations, asylum seeker populations, do not honor that human dignity that is supposed to be part of the way that global citizens behave toward one another. And we can move to the next slide. So I mentioned Dreamers. In 2020, there were 643,000 Dreamers. Some of them fall under the category of the DACA students. And in the state of Missouri, for example, state institutions are not allowed to enroll undocumented students, even those who were protected under the DACA program. Every year, there are about 30% of visa applications, of student visa applications to the US and Canada are denied. And the way that mobility works, the privilege of the blue passport is something that we often talk with students about prior to our engagement in other countries, because to leave the United States and enter many countries around the world, it's an action that we take with very little thought and consideration, while for people from most countries around the world, and definitely those in the global South, to come to the United States, they have to go through lengthy and expensive processes just to get a visa to give them the permission to come and visit relatives, or come and go to Disney World, or come to the US and engage in educational or business pursuits. So those imbalances, I think, is what makes it problematic for me, and especially as somebody who went through the process of acquiring citizenship in a country different than the one that I was born in. the automatic application of the term global citizenship is one that I find problematic, and that I have questioned in my scholarship and in my conversations with colleagues, and definitely in the preparation that I have for my students as we are planning to travel abroad.
Dr. Malfatti, can I just add a point right here?
Yes, please. It's
Um,
be a conversation. I love it.
so I'm so glad you mentioned this blue passport privilege because, our office is involved in both inbound and outbound activity. And so we're very much aware of the difference in this privilege when we have, very high level individuals coming to the medical center, and we've helped them with their documentation to get their visa to come to the US. And we realize, we know how difficult that is and how much work goes into that. But even with the visa in hand, it's when you come through Customs and Border Patrol, CBP, there is no guarantee that you will be allowed into the United States. So it's the whole process, but then there's also always knowing that when you land in the United States, there's no guarantee that you'll actually be allowed in until you're allowed in. And our students travel with a lot of confidence that as long as they have their paperwork in order, they will be given full entry into that country that they're traveling to. And there should be, I mean, we understand there should be some reasonable, belief that you'll be allowed in, but it's really hard for an American to understand that the CBP in India has every right to deny that student entry into India. It may be very unfair, but it's still there within their rights and their their sphere of control and power to do so, just like they do in the United States.
Mhm, mhm. And it's something that we take for granted. I had a colleague that several years ago showed up in Vietnam without a visa. And he was like, I didn't know you needed a visa to go to Vietnam. And I'm like, it's Vietnam. There was a US war in Vietnam. You would even think that there might be that need. And he was placed under hotel arrest until the visa was processed. And he missed it. The airlines missed it. The person that he bought his ticket from missed it. But I think it's because we make these assumptions that as Americans and Europeans, we have the right to move around the world, and not in the same way as others
Yeah,
do or might.
freely. Yeah. Yeah, I had a similar experience because I was married to someone from the Federated States of Micronesia, and I imposed my US privilege on his situation. And days before we were set to go to Belgium, realized that we had to actually apply for a visa for him. I thought my, white American privilege covered all. I mean, it just never occurred to me, I didn't even have those words at that time, obviously, but yeah, we had to prove like financial proof of support and had to have everything emergency rush through the Belgian consulate so that he could actually get a visa.
Yes. Yeah. When I was doing my study abroad as an undergrad in Spain, I was traveling with University of Missouri peers, who decided on a whim that they wanted to go to Portugal. And so at the time, I was a US resident, but not a citizen. And when I called the Portuguese consulate to ask about getting a visa as a Colombian, they said it would probably be 4 to 6 months. And I was like, what? I'm already here in Spain. I'm a resident of the US. And I was 20 something. How many crimes could I have committed? But they got to go and I didn't get to go. And that was one of those moments where, for some of them, the realization that not everybody has the same access to the world. and to the global mobility that we take for granted. I would love to open. We can move to the next slide. Okay, we can start the discussion on what we have covered so far, as far as those aspirational goals that are embedded in the United Nations idea of global citizenship. Or I'm tempted to start a petition to the United Nations, because I think the term is not inclusive. And for it to be at odds with the Sustainable Development Goals for inclusion and equity, it's something that I think they should have considered, but I don't know just how much.
It's interesting because even though I can feel all these connotations that are attached to global citizenship, I wasn't really thinking about it. But when you stop for one moment and consider, who do we use that term for? It is always a person of privilege who has the ability to travel to other countries. And like you said, they have that freedom of entry and mobility, to go and to do whatever the person, decides they want to do, whether it be to study, to do research, to work on community programs. And yet we really save that as like a badge of honor for only those individuals who are participating in that type of engagement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember having a conversation a long time ago when this term started kind of popping up in our education abroad literature, education abroad, marketing materials. And at that time, I was questioning the fact that we were giving global citizenship badge, as you mentioned it, to young people who were not very good local citizens. Like, did you vote in your last? I mean, like the things you associate with citizenship. Did you vote in the last election? Are you engaged in your community? That then now we're going to kind of prop you up and put you into the global stage instead of just helping you develop those skills locally that can help to that global stewardship or the planetary stewardship that should be the goal.
But and you add on to that, like young people or whatever age even of individuals who may be engaging globally or internationally, are they also doing so with the proper mindset and verbiage? Like you said, words have power. And how are the individuals engaging globally? What words are they using? Is it a relationship of reciprocity and mutualism, or is it, we're coming in as the savior to fix your problems and then leave, and I'm a global citizen because I've done some good.
Yeah.
Some good.
Well, and then you start questioning all the language. I was in Puerto Rico, as I mentioned last week, and at one of the hotels, there was the statement about help us save the planet. And in my head, immediately, it was like, the planet doesn't need saving. It just needs to be left alone, as COVID showed us, that when we're not damaging the planet restores itself. The baby turtles are hatching in the beaches of India, and animals are kind of reclaiming this habitat that humans intruded upon. And you see peacocks parading on the streets and storks returning to places in Paris and other places in Europe where their nesting areas used to be. Just because we quieted down in the the automobiles and motorcycles and mopeds and all of it, and the hustle and bustle of humans is not there. So it's really interesting to think about the way that we talk about certain things. And when it comes to exclusionary terms, just this morning, my son works for Unilever, and so it caught my attention that they had an article how Unilever is removing the word normal from all of their lotions and creams, because the term normal is found that 74% of people feel excluded when you see this is for normal skin. And so I was like, a term like normal, that should be the benchmark. We all feel, or not all of us, but 3/4 of the population feel that they don't belong in that term.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've always had an issue with the term normal, but never really even thought about it relative to skin. But yeah, it is by, I think, inherently exclusionary, and can make you feel like there's something wrong because your skin isn't normal, or you don't feel normal, whatever that's supposed to be. We actually had a presentation on the word queer, and how that terminology, and I don't own this information, but the young person who was presenting was saying how it's much more of a term because we all are weird or queer in our own ways, and it reminds me of Dr. Seuss, who said, who says, I'm a little weird, you're a little weird, and we find each other and we fall in mutual weirdness, love. And there's so much truth to that. And I think I love the fact that we're becoming aware of that and the power of our words and what we say, and the true meanings. And not that we're not going to be perfect. We're going to say something, and we're going to not always be as inclusive and kind as our hearts want us to be. But I love the fact that there's just more attention and awareness from everyone. Our students are certainly, helping us also to develop that awareness. They're bringing their own awareness and their own voices to the conversation. Yeah. On that note, of our students and individuals who are on today, does anyone have something they would like to share or add? You can put your camera on, take off your mute as you want.
Dr. Malfatti, my name is Rusha. I'm a third-year medical student, and I really like how you were talking about how some people don't really realize their privilege with unrestricted travel throughout the world. So I'm a resident of the United States, but I don't have a United States passport. And I feel like I'm always running into the same thing where I'm traveling with friends, either for school or outside of school. I always have to go that extra step to apply for a visa, or just have extra documents just to make sure I don't get turned away at whatever airport we're going to. So it's really nice to see that somebody else is also aware of those same things and has experienced those in the past.
Well, and I think that it was my experience when I went through it, that the people with whom I was traveling all of a sudden started questioning, what did you have to do to even get to the United States? And why is it that the residence is not the same as a citizen, and you already have a child in the United States? What else would you have to do to be recognized as somebody that belongs? And so that aspect of belonging, when you blow it up from the national to the global level, makes it even more problematic, because just as Rusha and I have experienced, global mobility is not something to be taken for granted, even when you have what you consider proper documentation. And so I remember getting into a heated conversation with a legislator here in Missouri, because he was talking about, in terms of immigration from Mexico, he said, why don't they just go through the proper channels? And I said, there are no proper
There are
channels
no proper channels.
for an agricultural worker in Chiapas to come to the United States,
Right.
because we haven't created that type of channel. And he couldn't understand it. And when I told him the first 2 times that my mother asked for a visa, a visitor's visa, to come and visit me here in the US, she was denied. And I lived next door to a Missouri Supreme Court judge that called and made himself personally responsible for my mom to get back on the plane and go back to Colombia. And even with that, the embassy in Bogota was like, no. And it was like, the more people we threw at them, the more they were like standing their ground. Fast forward, my mom became a resident and then a citizen. But those initial conversations, and again, like you, I had already purchased her ticket. I thought it was a shoot in, because I was already here and I was a citizen, but that actually worked against her.
It did, yeah.
Because
at the embassy, they want to prevent they want to show ties to the country that they're leaving. And in this case, there were ties to the United States. So they were afraid that there was an immigration intent.
Yes.
So they are able to impose their own, they impose on people their beliefs about your intent. I think what's really important, though, Dr. Malfatti and Rusha, is when people are able to humanize the immigration issues, it's very helpful, because across the board, and I don't blame Americans for this, I think it's a fact, and I say this very non-judgmentally, that Americans are ignorant about immigration, and they're truly the complexity of immigration, getting a visa, coming to visit the US, getting an H-1B, whatever the case may be, partially because it is very complicated. We have a very broken, complicated immigration system, and you almost have to be in the field like you have to be in the field like me, or you have to be a very specific immigration attorney to really understand, the entire picture. And that's part of the problem with our those who make the laws and make the decisions, is they can't possibly know. It's a lot to know. It's a lot to understand. So the more we can personify it and humanize it, the more people begin to understand, oh, this is what it really means. It's not the little sound bites they put on TV or, in a newspaper. This is what it really means in reality, that, that like Rusha has to worry about her ability to re-enter the United States because she's a permanent resident. It means Dr. Malfatti's mom can't come visit her for Christmas. That's the reality.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to what Rusha was saying. I can completely relate. So I'm considered a legal resident alien. And I remember my husband was in the United States military, and that was how we met. And he had come here already to set everything up for us. And I remember being at the airport with my 5-year-old kiddo and going through immigration. And I remember that anxiety, knowing full well I had all my documents in order. I paid all my good money to be able to come and live here and work. And, I followed all the steps. And yet still to this day, whenever I travel somewhere and I enter the US, it's always that bit of anxiety, even though I know everything's fine. Still there's you have to give your fingerprints and everything. You have to go through the special line and all that. So yeah, Rusha, I can absolutely relate.
Struggle is real.
Yeah. the other part of that is that there are places in the world where I move more smoothly with my Colombian passport than I do with my US passport. And so, for example, when we traveled with a group of colleagues to Brazil, the US people had to get a visa. And because Colombia has an agreement with Brazil and Peru, my Peruvian friend and I could go through the kind of Andean passport line that got us right in without a visa. So
Yeah.
those
At that time, Brazil was being really funny. They would deny the number of visas that America denied Brazilians, and on a day, they would turn around the next day and deny the same number for Americans wanting to go to Brazil. But now we have an open, visa waiver program between us for tourists. But at the time, it was really funny. I actually applauded Brazil every time on that. I was like, good for you.
Yeah. Well, before we run out of time, because I know we're moving right along, I wanted to extend an invitation with these ideas of cultural humility and global stewardship. I think that, as this quote says, true humility is staying teachable regardless of how much you already know. And for those of us whose lives are kind of infused by the academy, we think we know a whole lot more than we really do. And so when we transcend our bubble and have the privilege of entering another cultural space, I think the best approach is to just accept the fact that in that space, we really know nothing, and that we're there to soak it all up and to learn as much as we possibly can, that the answers that are best practices, best approaches here may be totally wrong for other places that we visit, be it classrooms, be it health centers, be it hospitals, be it refugee camps. And that really the first 48 hours to 1 week, we should just be learning. We should just be soaking in and allowing them to teach us and showing that humility of the ability of being taught. And it's in that space that you can really engage in global stewardship, because then the solutions to the problems that are being presented are not ones that you're importing, but they are emerging from that conversation and that reciprocal learning space that you have with others. I love this graphic because it kind of talks about the infinity loop of our relationship to all that is. The humans, the animals, the vegetation, the planet, the cosmos. And I think that that's where we usually fail our students, when we create, and I think we're becoming more aware of the environmental impact that we have with our programming. But it dawned on me, it took probably 3 years going to India for me to catch on to the fact that if I take 10 students who consume 3 bottles of water a day, at least, at the end of the day, I am leaving 30 bottles of water every single day for 48 days in a country that is not my country. And so it becomes, instead of it's not my trash, but it's my world, it becomes, it is my trash and it's not my space. So I really don't have the right to leave all this behind for them to have to deal with. So the global stewardship framework instead of being that badge, instead of being that privilege, humbles, I think, educators and program participants to see what it is that we are seeking to do for the planet and humanity when we engage in cross-cultural programming, and definitely geographic displacement, or mobility. Instead of focusing on what I'm earning in terms of cultural competence and even cultural adaptability, is weighing what it is that I'm bringing and what it is that I'm leaving behind into all the spaces that we seek to visit and engage with other humans on, be it for education, for medical care, definitely in medical care. And I will make a shout out to Dr. Mani because we've had some of these conversations. There is so much local knowledge that can be missed if we just come in with our baggage of goods and ideas into a space that it's not one that we truly know. We may miss the forest for the woods and not deliver the type of, not come up with the commonly agreed upon or sought after solutions, because we already come with an agenda of what is supposed to be happening. So I would invite those of us who are participating in this conversation today that to consider global citizenship in the terms, the aspirational terms that the United Nations has provided for us, and in the practical terms of cultural humility and global stewardship. And if you have other ideas of how to be better planetary inhabitants and human co-creators, I would love for you to share them with us and keep growing this idea in terms that benefit everyone involved. And I think at this point, I'm ready for my discussion. There we go. And my contact information. So if anybody wants to continue the conversation, I have started collecting articles on global citizenship and contesting global citizenship, contesting coloniality, these aspects of education and approaches to relating to others that if anybody wants me to share, I'll be happy to create a box folder or a Google folder that we can all contribute to. And that, I think that would be a really good way to go about it, continuing the conversation.
Yeah, that would be great. Maybe we could send it out too to our participants today.
Okay, I'll share.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or follow-up comments for the enrichment of the group?
I just want to say, Dr. Malfatti, it was great to have you back again. It's always wonderful to have our views reiterated, that it is important to learn from each other, and that, we're all equal in this. No one is in any way superior to someone else. And it's always good to challenge our thinking, especially when we say, we're all global citizens, but really, what does that mean? Especially for me, I go back to someone will say, well, it's really expensive for me to fly to Zambia. And I'm going, well, it's way more expensive for the Zambian to fly to the US than it is for you to fly there. And so it's one of those things where I always try to keep that in mind, especially when we talk about reciprocity. It's how can we make that work for everyone? So I just want to thank you again for coming back, and I hope you will come back again.
No, it is my pleasure.
Yeah, it's such an important message. And I think it kind of goes back to your quote of humility is not like a one and done, like a skill that we just achieve. It's a daily reminder, and it's a daily practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I I know from my own experience of living in Ponape for 3 years, like the longer I was there, the more I realized I didn't know and I would never know or understand, you know. It was very humbling to realize there was just a lot at play within the culture that was beyond me because I wasn't born into it. And so it's really it's good to have those moments and to have those reminders. And I feel like every time we have you, it's just such a good reminder of, you know, where we want to be and how we want to interact with the world. So I appreciate you so much, Dr. Malfatti.
Well, and I think as an add-on to that is the idea that we don't really have to leave our communities to have an opportunity for that stewardship and that cultural humility. As we have learned slowly, sometimes, and harshly some others, the lived experiences of our African American brothers and sisters right here in the United States, it's one that even though we were born here, we don't understand, and we are, I think, beginning to have a better sense of what it is to be Black in this country, and it's not just Black people; it's the experience of
Immigrants.
Latinos born in the U.S. versus Latinos who migrated, who are first waves. I see my U.S. experience and the U.S. experience that my children are having are totally different. So it only takes one generation for some of those things to flip. But staying humble and seeking first to understand and to be understood, I think still remains a great goal. And I think that what you do with these sessions allows us to plant seeds, as well as to, like Alexa said, visit some of the tenets that we take for granted, and some of the things that we don't very mindfully spouse, and questioning every once in a while, what is it that what is it that I mean when I say I'm going to buy a nude pair of pantyhose and that I get to find a nude pair of pantyhose that actually matches my skin. It's like, oh.
Or Band-Aids, right?
Or Band-Aids, yes, yeah. And what is normal? So it will be interesting to see where that Unilever conversation takes us with the term normal. But so stay weird.
Yes, my goal. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.